Hello. Today we will be reading Chapter 3 of Takeout by Margaret Maron. While waiting for the medical examiner to determine if they were dealing with two accidental deaths or a double homicide, Sigrid had a clerk pull Matty Mouton's record. It showed several misdemeanors and that he had twice done time for minor drug-related felonies. With no other pressing cases, Tilly did a search for data on Ms. Delvico and her housekeeper. Nothing on Miss Orlando, he reported, and any mention of Miss Delvico has to do with her husband's activities. Matty may have bragged about being connected, but his only link to the mob seems to be through her, and everything I found indicates that Delvico kept his home life totally separate from his business. When Albie and Laurie returned to the office after lunch, they had little to show from their latest canvass of the neighborhood. As was common in the Soho area so close to the river, the street was a mixture of scruffy commercial and pricey residential. Except for the diner and that house with the red door at the end, the buildings on the south side of the street were all warehouses. No windows and nobody there on a regular basis. We checked by Giuseppo's Pons again, said Albie, who brushed back a lock of her long braid hair as she laid her notes out on her desk. One of the waiters remembered that they'd had an extra takeout order for lasagna. The customers ordered it at the table after they'd finished eating, and they paid cash, so it didn't show up in the receipts. She said that she'd seen the couple before, but she didn't know their names. The woman's white, the man's black. Both good-looking, both mid to late 30s. She's pretty sure she would recognize them again, said Jim Lurie, popping the top on a can of soda. He took a long, thirsty swallow, then set the can on his desk so that he could flip through his notes. The guy that runs the cleaners across the street from that bench says he saw Mouton talking to Miss Orlando a time or two. He's open later than the other shops along the block, so he's seen people from the neighborhood drop off food there. A black guy showed up on that bench last fall and was sleeping there pretty regularly till late February or early March, when Mouton claimed the bench for himself and ran the guy off. Nobody has a name for him, and he hasn't been seen around there since, but he's why people first began bringing food there. We told the patrol in that area to try to come up with a name, said Albie, and we asked the Jennings woman at the other end of the street if she'd ever talked to him. She says not. Tilly looked up from his computer screen, a smile on his round, cherubic face. I forgot to tell you, Lieutenant. Janice Jennings owns her building, and it's registered as a single-room occupancy. Sigrid frowned. An SRO? It seemed a little upscale for that. Tilly was looking so pleased with himself that the penny dropped right away. Are you saying that her red door isn't just a decorative whim? Tilly nodded. Nothing's been proved and nobody's been charged, but complaints have been made, mostly by Ms. Delvico. It appears to be very discreet. The ground floor is a common area, shared kitchen and laundry room, dining facilities and lounge. Unlike most SROs, though, each bedroom seems to have a private bath and the rooms are individually rented. So the freebie that Maddie got? Albie rolled her eyes and Laurie grinned. I doubt if it was a takeout carton of leftovers. What about the second man? Sigrid asked. Any hits on his prints yet? Tilly shook his head. The dry cleaner didn't notice him, and the other shops close at 5. "We spoke to someone from every house on the street," said Lowry, "and no one recognized his picture. At least no one said they did." "Oh, and Rudy Gottfried sends his regards," said Albie. "He lives across from the diner and says he knows you." Albie tried to mask the open curiosity that everyone in the squad room felt about their boss's personal life. They knew that Oscar Newman and the lieutenant had been lovers, as unlikely as that seemed, because the papers had covered his death and aspects of his life and his art in minute, minute detail. Before the pause grew awkward, they were joined by Detective Sam Hentz. He had accompanied the bodies to the morgue, and a faint chemical smell clung to his brown linen sports jacket and to the two large bags that held the dead men's clothing and personal effects. Tilly immediately reached for one of the bags and began going through the pockets again. All of the detectives in Sigurd's command, hence, had been most resentful of her appointment, and they were still somewhat wary of each other. "Cone give you the results?" she asked. "Sorry, Lieutenant." He handed the bag with Matty Mouton's things to Albie. He said he'd try to have something for us by mid-morning. Sigrid turned back to Lowry and Albie and said, "Did you question Charlotte Randolph?" "Who?" "A door or two up from Gottfried." Sam Hentz paused and turning out the pockets of a pair of pants from the unidentified dead man and looked up with interest. "The Charlotte Randolph? She lives there?" "Who's Charlotte Randolph?" asked Dina Urbranska, the most junior member of the team. Built like a golden palmino, she was forever dropping coffee mugs, tangling her jacket on doorknobs and armrests, and bumping into people indoors. For some quixotic reason, the normally impatient and urbane Hentz had taken the awkward young woman under his wing to mentor and turn her into a proper detective. "Before you were out of the egg," Hentz told her, "she was one of the greatest sopranos of her time." "Which was when?" asked Lowry. "When I was still a kid myself," Hentz admitted. "The Met used to build whole new productions around her. I saw her in Rosencavalier, and I've never forgotten it. She was golden." Elaine Albie was impressed. "You went to the Metropolitan Opera when you were a kid?" Hentz shrugged. "I have an aunt who loves it. So, did you question Randolph?" "I questioned an old woman at number 403, Albie said. "But now that you mention it, she carried herself like she'd been somebody, and she did have a nice voice." "She still is somebody," said Tilly, who had abandoned his inspection of the clothes to search online for Charlotte Randolph's name. "She just signed a big contract to write her autobiography, the publishers calling it a tell-all blockbuster. Sounds like she has had quite a colorful personal life. A couple of famous singers, a wealthy philanthropist, a New York senator, and a Connecticut governor." He swiveled his screen around so that they could see the woman's picture. Evidently a publicly photo taken from one of her concert performances. She wore a low-cut period gown with a diamond necklace and earrings. Her blonde hair was carefully styled, and there was a definite come-hither twinkle in her blue eyes. "Wow," said Dina Urbranska. "The hair's white now and shorter, but that's her all right," said Albie. "She said that she sent food down to that bench once in a while, but not Tuesday night, and she didn't recognize either of our guys from the pictures." "On the other hand," Sigrid said, "according to Rudy Gottfried, she has a niece and a stepson who bring her food fairly often." I saw them at the other I saw them the other night. The niece is white and the stepson's black. That couple from Just Ponies? Albie asked Lori. We'll wait for Cohn's report, Sigurd said. If it is poison, we'll ask if they brought her takeout of lasagna last night. Across the room, Tilly was giving Maddie Mouton's extra pair of pants a closer examination. They were of good quality and had probably started out as the bottom half of an expensive suit. Except for lint and 2 pennies, the pockets were empty, and Tilly was ready to move on until he noticed a small watch pocket almost obscured by the left front pocket. He stuck his finger in and touched metal. Lieutenant, he said, it's another key. Looks like a car key. The key went around the room, but no one could say what make of car it was for. Looks like a standard blank duplicate, said Lowry. There's a hardware store at my subway stop. I'll check it out. With nothing more to do till Cohn gave them his findings, Sigrid was pleased to realize she could keep an appointment she'd made earlier in the week. As she passed Sam Hentz's desk on her way out, she couldn't resist saying, Your operation loving aunt. No, your opera loving aunt. That wouldn't be your Aunt Lizzie, would it? When she took over the department, Sigrid had read through all the personnel files. Because of Hentz's early antagonism, she had taken a second look at his. She seldom paid much attention to clothes in those days, but then Lowry made an envious comment about a well-cut jacket Hentz was wearing, so when she spotted him driving an expensive sports car, she had gone back for a third look, hoping to learn how one of her team could legitimately afford it. Listed as his next of kin was an aunt, Lizzie Stoppelmeyer. A few clicks on the computer confirmed that Elizabeth Stoppelmeyer was the widow of Irving Stoppelmeyer, whose face was almost as familiar as that of a certain Kentucky colonial. Stoppelmeyer pastries could be found on the shelves of every grocery store east of the Mississippi, from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. When Sigurd asked, Hentz admitted that he was his childless aunt's favorite nephew, hence the sports car, his beautifully tailored suits, and the silk ties. Relieved not to have a dirty cop on her team, she had not shared Hentz's secret with the others. Now Hentz gave a wry smile. What can I say? She thought I might have musical talents. According to Elliot Buntrock, Hentz's Aunt Lizzie was right. He had heard Hentz play at a village jazz club and had learned that he was a better-than-average jazz pianist who had put himself through college playing in cocktail bars. Sigrid had a feeling that this was something else Hentz never planned to share. Well, she could understand that. It would be a kick to meet Charlotte Randolph in person, though, said Hentz. She was the classic showbiz story where the understudy goes on as a complete unknown and comes off a star. Marcus Livingstone's warm brown face lit up in a wide smile, and he chuckled when his secretary showed Sigrid in. I was beginning to think you were blowing me off again, he teased. Oscar Newman's attorney had his law office on Madison Avenue, and Sigurd was only a few minutes late, but his words recalled the many times she had failed to show up after Newman's death. Unexpected circumstances had necessitated a new will, and Newman had planned to give it serious thought while out in California. As a stopgap, though, he had signed a simple everything to Sigrid will. When Livingstone explained that she was now a very wealthy young woman, she had been so unnerved that she couldn't deal with all the complicated decisions that suddenly faced her. Instead, she'd pulled the covers over her head and started sleeping 18 hours a day. Eventually, Livingston had persuaded her that they could do it together. Besides, he said, taxes are going to take most of it anyhow. Not quite true, of course, not by a long shot, but his calm reassurance persuaded her to make a start. Newman had agreed to the major retrospective that Elliot Buntrock had proposed, but no papers had been signed, so that had been the first order of business. After that, step by step, she and Livingston had formed a working relationship, and she now trusted him completely. Today's meeting was to sign the final papers for the sale of Newman's Connecticut house. As chair of the art department at Vanderlyn College, he had rented an impersonal three-room furnished apartment here in the city, but his home and his studio were in Connecticut, and that's where he spent his weekends and summers. Livingston's secretary had arranged to have the apartment cleaned out, and Sigrid had given up the lease to it without regret. But the house was harder. It wasn't just the memories of their weekends there together, it was his books, his notebooks, his clothes, his unfinished paintings, 1,000 items, and each item demanded a decision. In the end, overwhelmed, she had kept nothing except Newman's pipe and the silver point pen he'd use to draw her portrait. Instead, she had turned the keys over to the two people best suited for the job, Elliot Buntrock and Hester Cohn, the current owner of the gallery that had represented Newman for almost 30 years. When they first met, Sigrid had been more than a little intimidated by the woman, who exuded so much blatant sexuality. So round, so firm, so fully packed, Hence had murmured when they interviewed Hester after the murder of another gallery owner. Something my grandfather used to say about women who looked like her, he explained. So round, so firm, so fully packed, so free and easy on the draw, whatever that meant. I'm sure you knew exactly what he meant, Sigurd said dryly. Henshead grinned. Probably not cigarettes, he'd agreed. Now, to her surprise, Hester joined them in a cloud of musky perfume. Eyes shining with mischief, she gave Sigurd an air kiss, then leaned over to kiss Marcus Livingston on his cheek and give him a glimpse down the front of her low-cut summery dress. No longer intimidated, Sigurd could smile when Livingston said, "Quit trying to make an old man's pulse beat faster, Mrs. Cohn." "When are you going to call me Hester?" she pouted, but took a chair next to Sigurd, smoothed her skirt around her shapely legs, and took a thick manila folder from a soft-sided green leather case that looked more like a purse than a briefcase. "Here's the inventory and a check for the things we sold minus our commission. You didn't specify who should get the check, so it's made out to your firm, Marcus, and you two can fight it out. Also a list of the artworks that are co-signed to Cohn and Munson Gallery, pending your approval, of course. We don't want to flood the market before the Arnhem show." "And how's that coming?" he asked. "Still on schedule to open it in September?" "That's what Elliot Buntrock says." She turned to Sigrid. "I've heard that Soren Thorvaldsen plans to come over for it." "Really?" The last she'd heard of Thorvaldsen, a Danish entrepreneur and an avid collector of Newman's paintings, he was facing some rather serious charges of money laundering. "He's not in prison?" Hester gave a cynical shrug. "Amazing what a good team of international lawyers can do, present company accepted." Livingston laughed. I'm no international lawyer, Miss Kahn. Next, he'll be telling us that he's just a country boy from the cotton fields of Columbia Law School, Hester told Sigrid. I'd love to stay and chat, but I have a client flying in from LA. She reached into her briefcase again and drew out a small sketchbook. I know you said you didn't want to keep anything, but I thought you might change your mind about this. Sigrid opened it at random and saw her own eyes looking back at her. She had never posed for Newman, yet here were her hands, her face, the back of her head in page after page of Newman's quick, sure pencil strokes. When? She whispered. How? She swallowed back the lump of grief in her throat. Turning another page, she saw herself sitting cross-legged on a couch in Newman's studio, absorbed in a crossword puzzle in the Sunday Times. Only a few penciled lines, but he had caught her concentration. She remembered glancing up to find him looking past her as if his mind were miles away before his sketchbook claimed his attention again. Elliot said that Oscar was thinking about line and portraiture, but this is the only example we found. Hester said, There's one near the back. She reached for the book. This one of you is quite amazing, isn't it? Too bad he never finished it. He finished it, Sigrid said quietly. Oh? What happened to it? Where? And then she took a closer look at Sigrid's eyes. Ah, she said. How stupid of me. I'm sorry, Sigrid. She handed the pad to Sigrid, who closed it and laid it next to her purse. You okay? Livingston asked when Hester had gone. Sigrid nodded. May I? She handed him the sketchbook, and the silence of the office was broken only by the slow turning of the pages. When he came to the end, he sighed, then gave it back to her without comment, before straightening his shoulders and opening the folder on his desk. Here's the best offer we've had on the house. Quite a bit over the market value, I'm afraid. Afraid? For a moment, Sigrid was puzzled, but then the meaning of his words came to her. Because it was his? Livingston nodded. Nothing we can do about it. All the locals up there know who owned it. But for what it's worth, I don't think the buyer plans to exploit the connection. Now, are you absolutely sure this is what you want to do, Sigrid? I could never live there, she said firmly, and the house is too beautiful to just sit empty. Let someone else enjoy it. She signed the papers and felt a sudden lifting of her spirits. The last of the hard decisions had finally been made. Hester and Buntrock would see to the art, which might take years to dispose of, but that was okay. Somehow the art had less personal meaning for her. Do you know yet what you'll do with the money? Livingston asked. You've talked about scholarships or a foundation to award grants. Any decision? Not yet. Could we leave it open for now? Of course. Thanks, Marcus. You've been very patient with all this. He tried to wave away her thanks, but she persevered even though expressing emotions had always been hard for her. Now she looked at him directly, the cool silver of her eyes meeting the warm topaz of his. I'm glad you are Newman's attorney. So am I, Sigrid, he said. So am I. And that's the end of chapter 3. I'll see you. Well, I won't see you, but I will see you tomorrow for chapter 4. Have a great day.